The zombie war came unthinkably close to eradicating humanity. Driven by the need to preserve the first-hand experiences from those apocalyptic years, while they still exist in living memory, Max Brooks traveled across the planet to find and record the testimony of men, women, and sometimes children who came face to face with the living, or at least the undead, hell of that terrible time. World War Z is the result. Some of these voices were chosen for the uniqueness of the perspectives and information they provide. Others are included because they speak for hundreds of millions who were forever silenced. Never before have we had access to a recording that so powerfully conveys the fear and horror, and also the brave spirit of resistance that gripped human society through the plague years.
Random House Audio presents World War Z by Max Brooks, read by a full cast.
It goes by many names: The Crisis, The Dark Years, The Walking Plague, as well as newer and more hip titles such as World War Z or Z War I. I personally dislike this last moniker as it implies an inevitable Z War II. For me, it will always be the Zombie War, and while many may protest the scientific accuracy of the word zombie, they will be hard-pressed to discover a more globally accepted term for the creatures that almost caused our extinction. Zombie remains a loaded word, a devastating word, unrivaled in its power to conjure up so many memories or emotions. And it is these memories and emotions that are the subject of this book. This record of the greatest conflict in human history owes its genesis to a much smaller, much more personal conflict between myself and the chairperson of the United Nations Post-War Commission report. My initial work for the commission could be described as nothing short of a labor of love. My travel stipend, my security access, my battery of translators, both human and electronic, as well as my small but nearly priceless voice-activated transcription pal, the greatest gift the world's slowest typist could ask for, all spoke to the respect and value my work was afforded on this project. So needless to say, it came as a shock when I found almost half of that work deleted from the report's final edition. It was all too intimate, the chairperson said during one of our many animated discussions. Too many opinions, too many feelings. That's not what this report is about. We need clear facts and figures, unclouded by the human factor. Of course, she was right. The official report was a collection of cold, hard data, an objective after-action report that should allow future generations to study the events of that apocalyptic decade without being influenced by the human factor. But isn't the human factor what connects us so deeply to our past? Will future generations care as much for chronologies and casualty statistics as they would for the personal accounts of individuals not so different from themselves? By excluding the human factor, aren't we risking the kind of personal detachment from a history that may, heaven forbid, lead us one day to repeat it? And in the end, isn't the human factor the only true difference between us and the enemy we now refer to as the living dead? I presented this argument, perhaps less professionally than was appropriate, to my boss, who, after my final exclamation of, "We can't let these stories die," responded immediately with, "Then don't. Write a book. You've still got all your notes and the legal freedom to use them. Who's stopping you from keeping these stories alive in the pages of your own, expletive-deleted, book?" Some critics will, no doubt, take issue with the concept of a personal history book so soon after the end of worldwide hostilities. After all, it has been only 12 years since VA Day was declared in the continental United States, and barely a decade since the last major world power celebrated its deliverance on Victory in China Day. Although this is primarily a book of memories, it includes many details, technological, social, economic, and so on, found in the original Commission report, as they are related to the stories of those voices featured in these pages. This is their book, not mine, and I have tried to maintain as invisible a presence as possible. I have attempted to reserve judgment or commentary of any kind, and if there is a human factor that should be removed, let it be my own. Part 1. Warnings. Greater Chongqing, the United Federation of China. At its pre-war height, this region boasted a population of over 35 million people. Now there are barely 50,000. Reconstruction funds have been slow to arrive in this part of the country, the government choosing to concentrate on the more densely populated coast. There is no central power grid, no running water besides the Yangtze River, but the streets are clear of rubble, and the local Security Council has prevented any post-war outbreaks. The chairman of that council is Kwang Jing-shu, a medical doctor who, despite his advanced age and wartime injuries, still manages to make house calls to all his patients.
The first outbreak I saw was in a remote village that officially had no name. The residents called it New Dachang, but this was more out of nostalgia than anything else. Their former home, Old Dachang, had stood since the period of the Three Kingdoms, with farms and houses, and even trees said to be centuries old. When the Three Gorges Dam was completed, and reservoir waters began to rise, much of Dachang had been disassembled, brick by brick, then rebuilt on higher ground. This new Dachang, however, was not a town, but a National Historic Museum. It must have been a heartbreaking irony for those poor peasants to see their town saved, but then only being able to visit it as a tourist. Maybe that is why some of them chose to name their newly constructed hamlet New Dachang, to preserve some connection to their heritage, even if it was only in name. I personally didn't know that this other New Dachang existed, so you can imagine how confused I was when the call came in. The hospital was quiet. It had been a slow night, even for the increasing number of drunk driving accidents. Motorcycles were becoming very popular. We used to say that your Harley-Davidsons killed more young Chinese than all the GIs in the Korean War. That's why I was so grateful for a quiet shift. I was tired. My back and feet ached. I was on my way out to smoke a cigarette and watch the dawn when I heard my name being paged. The receptionist that night was new and couldn't quite understand the dialect. There had been an accident or an illness. It was an emergency. That part was obvious. And could we please send help at once? What could I say? The younger doctors, the kids who think medicine is just a way to pad their bank account, they certainly weren't going to go help some Nongmin just for the sake of helping. I guess I'm still an old revolutionary at heart. Our duty is to hold ourselves responsible to the people. Those words still mean something to me, and I try to remember that, as my deer bounced and banged over dirt roads the government had promised but never quite gotten around to paving. I had a devil of a time finding the place. Officially, it didn't exist, and therefore wasn't on any map. I became lost several times and had to ask direction from locals who kept thinking I meant the museum town. I was in an impatient mood by the time I reached the small collection of hilltop homes. I remember thinking, this had better be damn serious. Once I saw their faces, I regretted my wish. There were 7 of them, all on cots, all barely conscious. The villagers had moved them into their new communal meeting hall. The walls and floor were bare cement. The air was cold and damp. Of course they're sick, I thought. I asked the villagers who had been taking care of these people. They said no one. It wasn't safe. I noticed that the door...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?